Hello guys, welcome back to our YouTube channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto becomes the champion of Primordial Devils and got harem? Part 1. Huge shout out to Mythos QB777 for this story. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. Are you sure you want to do this, Sasuke? You know that you won't win, right? Came the voice of Naruto Uzumaki as he stared at the Uchiha. His Anbu-styled black clothing and black hooded cloak making him look more like a reaper instead of what the Uchiha was used to. His fox skull mask painting a visage of death that made many feel as though there was no hope. The blonde also held a katana whose blade was as black as the night sky, and it seemed to glow with a bit of purple energy at the edge of the blade. The tsuba was made of a crimson metal and had the shape of a 9-pointed star, though only the points in the front were made to do damage. The handle was wrapped in a black cloth and the pommel was also a crimson red. Sasuke knew that this would be their final battle. His eyes looking down at the water they stood on. You're right, Naruto. I still don't know why the village turned against you or how you were able to hide your true rank for so long, but I want you to promise me something. He then looked directly into the blonde's eyes. Naruto sighed, but nodded and asked what the Uchiha wanted. His voice was more refined and aristocratic than the Uchiha was used to hearing. And what is it, my friend? Sasuke closed his eyes before activating their full power and drawing his sword. Take my eyes when you kill me and then merge them with your body. You are the only one I can trust with them, the only one that can use them for what was truly intended. He then got into his stance and then waited for Naruto to promise him this one last request. Naruto closed his eyes before he nodded. Very well then. Come Sasuke, come and meet your death. I promise that I will keep those eyes away from others and I will only use them when necessary. Naruto then placed his katana in a reverse-held grip, his left hand trembling slightly while the right held his blade. His right foot moving forward slightly and bending the knee to assume a stance Sasuke had seen only one other person use before. That's Itachi's stance. How did you learn it? Sasuke gasped. Naruto chuckled and answered. Who do you think taught his squadron, Sasuke? The blonde then shot forward and Sasuke Uchiha was hard pressed to block the first 20 slashes. Naruto was in Anbu for that long, damn it, the Sandaime must have sent him to the academy to keep an eye on me. That, or Itachi asked him to. Sasuke thought as he jumped away from the relentless assault of his sword master. He knew that Itachi Uchiha only used this style a few times and there were never any survivors who faced it. It was like a raging hurricane or a tornado that was relentless. Even Sasuke's eyes were starting to have trouble with predicting the movements. Just like always, he is unpredictable. Sasuke thought as their swords started to clash. Now that he had released the weights that he was using before, he could keep up with the blonde somewhat better. Naruto knew that Sasuke was not really putting his best effort into this fight. He also knew why the Uchiha wanted to hold back a little. He doesn't want anyone to sense us. The council tried to bribe him into hunting me down and he wants me to end it. He sighed and ducked under a slash from the Uchiha. This is different now, Sasuke. I was always holding back in the past. Naruto's voice sounded sad, but even Sasuke knew that he spoke the truth. I know. He replied as their blades locked for a moment. The council did some digging and found that Uzumaki Naruto had only entered the scene after a nearly 8-year absence. You disappeared from the age of 2 months till you joined the academy at the behest of Sarutobi Hiruzen. He then jumped back again. I still have to wonder why you accepted that mission, it never did end anyways. Sasuke shook his head after saying that. The blonde chuckled sadly. You're right. I was already the commander of the Anbu at the age of 6. I taught Itachi and his peers from the age of 5 till I was 7 just before I accepted the mission to watch over the next generation. He sighed before finishing. And now, only the two of us remain. Sasuke nodded. Hi. This new war with the other side of the world was not expected, but here we are. And now, the village wants you dead all because you couldn't save them. What a load of hit. Naruto nodded as Sasuke leapt forward to begin again. The two kept fighting, neither one of them going all out. It looked more like a dance, and both were apparently skilled. If anyone else was watching, they would have said it was the most epic sword fight that any had ever seen. Neither noticed that a young-looking girl was watching them. She wore a gothic Lolita-type dress, with the upper front half cut away. Her nipples were covered with black tape in an X formation, and her chest was small enough to be called a child. Her hair was as black as her eyes, and long enough to reach her knees. Her dress was a myriad of strange for a gothic type of girl. Black and white striped stockings, pink shoes, white skirt, and a pink symbol on the back of the black dress. She gazed at the fight, though her eye was really on the black outfitted blonde. She smiled slightly, though any who saw her would not be able to see it. You are the one, Naruto-kun. You can stop what that fool failed to ensure. The Trihiksa and Yawa were foolish to think that they could stop it, but you will. She then turned to look at a teenager that appeared beside her. They were both floating in the air and the new girl wore a white kimono. You are here to get him away from this world, Office. I shouldn't be surprised. The voice was almost as cold as the now named younger looking girl. The Ouroboros dragon goddess nodded. Hi, I have, Koikimi Shinigami of Universe 93. The Shinigami nodded and stared at the Uzumaki that was fighting. Please Office-chan. Ensure that Yawa's group does not acquire him. Only the Citri heiress can be trusted to take proper care of him. No one else. The Office raised an eyebrow as Koikimi never called her Chan unless she was begging. You know what the Gremory heiress will do then, Koikimi? The Ouroboros asked. The Shinigami nodded. Hi. The mirror of Yada has shown it. Her new pawn will bring disaster if left unchecked. The Office nodded and sighed. I still envy you all for getting that old scrap of whatever mirror used to do that. The dragon then looked back at the boy she had come here for. Oh, and why is that Office-chan? Koikimi asked before deciding to tease the Infinity Dragon. Are you perhaps hoping that it will show you who would be worthy to become your mate? Is the void getting so lonely, Office-chan? The Office slowly turned her head to glare at the Shinigami. Shut up. Her voice was even colder than Koikimi had ever heard before. That wasn't a no, Office-chan. Koikimi said in a sing-song voice. The Office continued to glare at the other goddess before finally turning back to the fight. Just let me take him away and leave me in peace, Ni-san. The Shinigami giggled before turning to watch the fight. It was now ending. Come on, Naruto. Stop holding back. Sasuke screamed as he tried to impale the Uzumaki. This fight felt different to him, he knew that Naruto was stronger than him. He also knew that the blonde was still wearing his heart on his sleeve. Are you certain, Sasuke? Naruto asked. You do know what will happen if I unleash even 20% of my power. Not even Kurama in his full form could match that. Naruto stopped Sasuke's sword with the index finger of his left hand. I am tired of all of this. I can't go on without your clanmate. Karen was the one who made me see. He replied and then lessened his grip on his sword. I loved her, Naruto. Naruto sighed before nodding. Very well, I will send you to her. Forgive me, my friend. He then threw his own sword away and Sasuke was surprised to see it fade out of existence. He then placed his right pointer and middle fingers on Sasuke's forehead. Sasuke felt a strange type of energy build up in Naruto's fingers and saw the blonde's eyes tear up. May you find joy in the pure world. Were the last words that Sasuke would ever hear on the mortal coil. Naruto watched as the light faded from Sasuke's activated bloodline. A small spark of electricity flowing through the Uchiha's head. He sighed and helped Sasuke's corpse lay down. He then heard Kurama's voice. What will you do with his eyes, Naruto? The nine-tailed fox asked. Naruto didn't even need to think. He conjured a scalpel and then started to remove the eyes of his friend. I will keep them locked away and I hope to find someone worthy of using them. Kurama sighed, knowing that Naruto wouldn't need them, and yet the fox felt that only Naruto was worthy of such eyes. This will take all of my cunning to do. If he finds out that I copied the eyes, then he might beat me. Kurama thought before sending a minuscule amount of his chakra through Naruto's hands. Kurama knew that Naruto wouldn't keep the eyes. He would destroy them, which was why Kurama was making copies. He was also going to work them into Naruto's DNA. They still didn't know that they were being watched and that one of the two observers were preparing to take them away from this world. I will also give him a small blessing. Office stated, which made Koikimi raise an eyebrow. And what would that be, Imauto? The Shinigami asked. Office smirked and turned to look at the one she called elder sister. You know that the only blessing I can give is one that defies the All-Creator's laws. Koikimi's eyes widened and she nervously gulped. You're not saying that? Office hummed and replied. Yes. He will be a paradoxical anomaly. Truly immortal as long as he uses the power, but he won't be able to use it indefinitely. She then raised her left hand and started to lowly chant in a speech that Koikimi had only heard once before. Oh dear, Kachan won't like this. But, not even I could stop Office. Koikimi worried at her bottom lip, biting it hard enough to cause pain, but not to draw blood with her fangs. I should call Kachan, but I don't want my dear Imauto to get in trouble. Damn it. She did want the boy to be well off and safe, however. So she decided she would wait until seeing their mother and then letting the Supreme Woman know about it. She didn't know that their mother was watching and laughing at her. Naruto sighed as he sealed the jar with Sasuke's eyes away. He didn't let Kurama know that the liquid in the jar was actually an acid. He rubbed his eyes, feeling a slight burn, but didn't pay too much attention to it. He then turned to the left as he had felt a buildup of power. He spotted two girls. One was a child's age and the other was a teenager. He knew that the teen was a goddess that he was somewhat familiar with, but the young girl he did not recognize. The power came from the younger of the two and he could feel that it wasn't threatening, but he knew there would be a bit of pain. Damn, this is going to hurt, he sighed before hearing the young girl's voice. Omen, but you are needed elsewhere. She then cast a spell and a magicircle appeared around him. He knew that this wasn't a chakra ability, having learned about mana from his father's notebooks 10 years ago. He even knew a few types of magic from studying the pre-chakra arts, even though they were few, plus they were difficult to translate. He glanced at the circle and deadpanned in recognition. Well, fuck me, the Ouroboros. He would have wondered why she was here, but didn't have time. He disappeared from that plane of existence, actually from that universe, and then felt pain before blacking out. Shit. Fuck. Hold on, Kit. Kurama screamed as a wall of colors flew by them. He was trying his damnedest to keep Naruto together. This place was not meant for humans, after all. You're probably going to hate me for this, but I have to change you. He said, sighing as he reached for his chakra. He then began molding it to change Naruto's DNA even further. It took a few minutes, but once the change started it was sudden. From the top of Naruto's head sprouted 2 golden fox ears, and from the end of his tailbone sprouted 9 golden fox tails. The tails and the ears had white tips. Though it was harder to see the white on the ears. The hole was torn in the back of Naruto's black Hakama-styled pants. It was a little forceful, Kurama had to admit, but at least Naruto was unconscious for it. Yeah, that would have hurt. His cloak was shredded, so one could see his outfit now. Naruto wore a black muscle shirt, looking like one that was worn on a hot summer's day. Over that he wore a black haori that went to his knees, on the back of it was a kanji that said Reaper. It was also on the left breast of the coat, both were crimson. On the bottom of the coat was a dark red flame design. His hakama were just as black, but there was crimson cloth bandages tied to his ankles and most of his shins to keep the pants from interfering with his leg movement. His sandals were a dark crimson, as were the fingerless gloves. Below the haori, but over the shirt, was a crimson Anbu vest. It had a black kanji that said Commander on the front and also held the emblem for Konohagakure. His belt was a crimson leather belt that had a buckle in the shape of a fox's head, where the eyes of the head had rubies grafted in them. His mask, which still looked like a sinister fox skull, remained on his face. It was made to absorb just as much damage as his flak vest. Though his entire outfit was embroidered with seals to constantly repair itself, as well as be nearly indestructible. His pouches, scrolls, books and other equipment would not be worried about. As Kurama remembered that Naruto held them in a seal just below his Anbu tattoo. Then again he could just conjure shit. I can't believe that Jai-san tried to have the old arts wiped out. Magic has a lot more uses than chakra. Kurama mentally sighed. Kurama also knew that Naruto was lucky to have found his father's notes. The Namikaze may have not been a full clan, but they were the oldest family that still existed. Kurama stopped thinking as a light enveloped Naruto and he disappeared from the void-like place they were in. Kurama was still safely sealed in Naruto's navel, so at least he could watch over the boy who had just become a Kikbi no Kitsune. Sona Citri's office, Kuo Academy. 17th of June 2011. Sona sighed and pulled her glasses from her face before she rubbed the bridge of her nose. She had been gazing at her evil pieces and worried at her bottom lip. Only one piece had been used, a bishop, and it had been used to turn Shinra Tsubaki into a devil. She was also dreading the next day. One Isama is coming to visit. Is this punishment for some other life? She groaned, but then a glowing purple light caught her attention. She opened her eyes and placed her glasses back on. What? She gasped as her queen piece started to shift and mutate. It turned a dark purple color and a sword formed pointing up from the crown. Looking a lot like the fabled sword in the stone, ready to be pulled out. She stared at the piece and wondered what it meant. But then a magicircle appeared on the ceiling and from it fell a young man. She jumped, not knowing if he was an enemy. Tsubaki slammed the door open right as he hit the ground and held an Ajinata. Sona stopped her by holding her hand up when she noticed the teen wasn't moving. She also noticed that his breath was labored and that he had 9 tails coming from his rear. A Kikbi. She then leaped over her desk and felt his neck for a pulse. It was frantic and her connection to her pieces was telling her that this teenaged man was right for her peerage. She turned to glance at her evil pieces again and found the changed queen piece was glowing brighter. Tsubaki approached, her Naginata still held in her right hand. Kaichu, what is going on? She then heard Sona gasp slightly and turned to stare at what held her king's attention. Her breath caught in her throat. Sona's eyes widened when she felt the teen's pulse almost stop. She didn't even stop to think as she jumped up to grab the queen piece and then turned back to him and placed it on his chest. Please let this work, she said and suddenly knew his name from a whisper. I command thee, Naruto Uzumaki, to rise and be reborn. Thou shalt become my queen and live a new life as a devil. Feel joy as you are reborn to be my second in command. The Citri family's magicircle spread beneath the blonde kitsune yokai, and the evil piece sunk into his chest. Sona sighed in relief when the connection she had with her piece told her it was a success. Tsubaki dismissed her Naginata as she too felt a connection with the blonde male. She also then felt the power he held. What the hell? She mentally asked herself and nearly fell to her knees. Sona was no better, as the power that rolled off of the teen was so staggering. It was almost like her sister was there, at full power, and yet the male was weak. Naruto Uzumaki. She recalled the name, before passing out. Tsubaki followed her shortly after. They wouldn't be leaving for a while. 20 minutes later. Afa sighed as she appeared in Sona's office. She looked around to see where Naruto was, and then her eye twitched. She saw Sona Citri passed out, with the teen devil's head resting just above Naruto's waist. She didn't know why she was suddenly irritated, but she figured she would find out later. I suppose I should get you all to a more comfortable place to rest. Her monotonous voice sounded out. If anything would have been nearby, it would have paused. She then approached the two she had come to check on, and then noticed Sona's bishop. She sighed again, and decided to conjure 3 beds. She used a telekinetic spell to lift them gently, and placed them on the beds. She then turned to sit on a chair that she had conjured, right next to the bed she had placed Naruto. Might as well finish the blessing. She said after a few minutes. Not even paying attention to the fact that Sona was waking up. Sona heard a voice coming from her right and had to stop for a moment. A blessing. What's going on? She opened her eyes and looked right. Though she couldn't see very well without her glasses, she did notice a very young-looking girl standing next to another bed. She looked around and spotted her glasses on her desk. Wait a minute, my office. She wanted to think it all through but would need her spectacles to see clearly. She summoned them to her hand and placed them on. Yep, my office. But how did beds get in here? She turned to the girl and started to sweat in recognition of the symbol on the girl's dress. It was on the back, right below the collar, and it was something that she had been warned about by Serapho Leviathan, her older sister. Off as she then saw a brief light flow from the girl's right arm and it collided with the young man she had resurrected earlier. She gasped as the new connection she had shuddered slightly before it strengthened. Office nearly smirked when she heard the Citri gasp. So, you are finally awake. She said and turned to the teenager. Her black eyes stared directly into the Citri's purple pupils and she nearly smirked at the fear she saw. And what does the dragon goddess of infinity want with me? Sona asked slowly. Office's eyes showed a small amount of amusement but her voice grated on Sona's psyche. I am here to tell you that should something bad happen to my champion before his destiny comes, I will destroy you and make you suffer for eternity. The Ouroboros then turned to look at Sona's new queen. He is special and I must impress upon you that his destiny is tied closely to yours now. She turned to leave and had only one last piece of information to give. He could be stronger than any being you've heard of, which is what I want. Take care of him, Sona Citri, as he will be your best ally, friend, and guardian. The office then disappeared, literally fading out of existence. Sona could not feel her presence, not even while she was there. She chose a champion. What in the Satan's names is going on? She then turned to the blonde male that was resting and suddenly felt like being close to him. She felt like a small voice was whispering into her mind, telling her that he was trusted and that he would be the best thing to happen to her. She didn't know why she was listening to the disembodied voice, but she did. She then approached the blonde and placed her hand on his shoulder. She then felt like she was being sucked through a straw. Sona was startled as she landed in what appeared to be a sewer, her muscles tensed and she felt like something was watching her. Kurama smirked as he beheld the one that changed Naruto even further. Let us see, will you be a good leader or a tyrant? He then lowly chuckled as the young lady glanced around. She hadn't looked behind her yet but turned at the sound of his chuckle. She froze as she beheld a Kikbi no Kitsune, easily thrice the size of the school. He then asked her an important question. So this is the one who saved Naruto's life. Tell me, why would you save him when you have no need to do so, young demon? Sona could feel this being's power and it made her shiver. This Kikbi was easily 3 times as strong as her sister, as well as said sister's 3 peerage members combined with her. Sona then caught on to the fact that it asked her a question and called her a demon. She steeled herself and answered. I saved his life because it felt like the right thing to do. Though, I am not a demon. I am a devil. Kurama grimaced slightly at hearing her call herself a devil. So we are in that universe. Damn, he thought to himself. He may have not traveled to other dimensions like the Nibi did, but he did pay some attention to her stories when they were all younger. My apologies, young one. Where we are from, those born of the underworlds are called demons by default. To know that we are in this universe is somewhat vexing. Naruto may have a small case of shock at learning that we have been thrown into another world. He smirked at her look of confusion. What do you mean, yokai? she asked, though didn't really want to anger him by not knowing his name. Firstly, my name is Kurama, and I am bound to the young man that you just saved. Secondly, to answer your question, this is not the only universe in existence. We come from a world that does not have devils. Kurama then laid his head on his arms so that his size wouldn't make her think he would attack. He had felt the truth from her words when she had answered his question. Sona relaxed, only slightly, when the massive fox seemed to adopt a relaxed stance. It was hard to tell with such a giant creature, after all. She could still feel his power, being a sensor-type mage helped in that regard. She then asked about their location. Where are we? You said that you came from another world, yet I still feel like I am in my office. Kurama chuckled again and answered. That's because we are still in your office. We are just in a pocket of sealed space within Naruto's mind. I pulled you in here because I felt the bond forming between yourself and my host. Sona raised an eyebrow. So, you are a spirit then? She asked. Kurama's roaring laughter made her feel like he was laughing at her, not at her question. No, young one. He said after he calmed down. I am a Bijk, a tailed beast. Born from the chakra of Otsutsuki Kagaya, a primordial goddess, and given a conscience by her son Hagoromo. Whom I call, my Tusan. He explained. This surprised Sona, as the only primordial goddess she knew of was Office. But then again, with the beast saying that there were other worlds out there, she shouldn't have been so surprised. An engine of our world called me a demon. But I was not born of the darkness. I am only a malevolent force of pure wrath to those who break the balance my Tusan created. He paused before continuing. Those ninja were so concerned with the arts of war that they captured and used me, along with my siblings, as weapons of war. He sighed, and the force of that sigh nearly blew her off her feet. My third host is the man you saved from death. His mother was the second. Sona gulped at the contempt this being had for humans. Is that why you speak so highly of him and me? Because we are not human. Kurama chuckled again. You see Naruto as a kitsune now, but he is the only one whom I have ever called friend. He was human before the Ouroboros threw us through the void to escape that world. I had to use half of my power to change him, and that was just to keep him alive. Sona paused for a few moments before she nodded. I see, then why have you called me here? Kurama stared right into her purple eyes. That is a color he will get lost in. He then put a small amount of power into his own eyes. The darkness creeped around her, and all she could see afterwards was the glowing red eyes of the beast. I have called you in here to give you that small bit of information, and to see if you were worthy to lead my host as your chess piece dictates. Sona gulped, fearing that he would not find her worthy, and was thinking that this monster would kill her. The darkness fled from around her, and she could see the Kyuubi smirk. You have been judged and I find you worthy. Take care of this young man, devil, do not shun him, or even try to treat him as a tool, and you will have the most powerful queen piece to ever have been seen on your side. She then felt herself be thrown out of that area, and her eyes widened at seeing the blue eyes of her new queen staring into her own. Kurama chuckled at knowing that Naruto would instantly feel the connection he had with her. He also laughed at the fact that Naruto would flip out at the fact that he was now half kitsune and half devil. Kurama, what's going on? Naruto mentally asked while scanning himself. He felt a few anomalies, but the most worrisome to him was a bond he could feel with the girl in front of him. One of his new tails twitched, but he didn't pay attention to that. Here's the sit rep of all that's happened in the last day. Konoha betrayed us, Sasuke was sent, you two fought. You killed him, then destroyed his eyes. We were teleported away by the Ouroboros dragon goddess. We wound up in a different world, and you were almost killed from the travel. This girl saved your life, but the cost was 2 changes. The Bijk replied. Naruto's mind processed this faster than Kurama's reply, but he still wasn't finished with his scan. He had to pause when he fully finished scanning the bond. Am I really bound to her as a servant? Never mind that, what did you do? Naruto heard Kurama chuckle, but the fox didn't answer. Fine, lazy ass. Naruto then noticed that the young lady was coming to consciousness. Her eyes caught him off guard for a moment and his own lessened their intensity. Sona stared into her queen's eyes and felt a small bit of nervousness at what he would say. She took a moment to calm herself and spoke to him. It is good to see you awake, you caused quite the scare earlier. She noticed his head tilt slightly to the side and his eyes changed slightly. His right eye turned black with a red 6-pointed star. His left turned to fully purple with concentric rings and 9 comma marks floating in a lazy spin on those rings. The pupil was a darker purple, and although she could feel power from these eyes, she felt like he didn't even know about them yet. Naruto's brain froze at her voice and he could have sworn that Kurama was laughing. It would be a while before he could respond though, as his new eyes were shutting down everything to help heal and settle his new appendages to his psyche. Sona noticed his eyes lose focus, but she heard the voice of Kurama speak to her. Well, I should have known that his new body would take a while to get used to. His mind is shutting down so that he can accumulate to everything that's happened. It shouldn't be longer than a few days. She nodded, not even wanting to figure out how the kitsune was able to speak to her. She didn't know why she did it, but she helped him lie back and then rubbed his arm in a comforting gesture. I'll need to find a suitable room for him, he doesn't have anywhere to stay. She then heard Tsubaki waking up. Leviathan Manor, Underworld, 17th of June 2011, late evening. Serapho Leviathan sighed as she sat in her personal study. If one could call it that, as it looked more like a room full of anime and manga. Her outfit was a black nightgown with a few pink stars spread out over it. A pink scarf that her mother had made for her quite some time ago. Her feet were bare, as well as not having any undergarments. One would think that she was waiting for a lover to turn up. Her eyes, however, told another story. I'm Buried. Her scream echoed out through her mansion, and the few servants she had ran away from the area her study was in. The mansion shook from the sound of her scream, and it scared everyone in the surrounding few miles. Serapho-sama. Please do not scream like that again. Came the voice of her headmaid. The woman stepped through the recently opened door, her orange hair styled in a ponytail, and was wearing a pink maid's outfit. Her outfit also held a few baubles that wouldn't be found on a normal one, all in blue. The Satan of diplomatic relations turned to the newly arrived devil. But sissy, I'm bored. She nearly screamed again. That's not my name, Sarah, never mind. The maid said and then placed a goblet of red wine in front of the Satan. And, didn't I tell you to call me Leviathan, how often do I have to? Serapho's eyes then glazed over before she turned to look out the balcony door. The maid raised an eyebrow but decided not to question the young-looking woman. So Tan has a queen, I wasn't there to watch her get a cute queen. No. Serapho screamed, the sound cracked all of the windows that were in the mansion. It was even louder than the scream from before. She jumped up from her couch and ran out the door. I'm gonna go see Sotan. The maid sighed and looked at the damage caused by the Satan's outburst. The windows shattered shortly after. I think I'm going to retire soon. This is too much, 100 years, I'm done. The maid then turned and left the room. She didn't even try to clean the mess of wine. Sona's house minor mansion, actually guest bedroom. 18th of June 2011. Sona sighed as she sat next to Naruto's bed. It didn't take long for her and Tsubaki to get the young blonde situated as he healed. She felt like today was not going to be a good day for her. When Isama will be at the academy soon or here, she sighed again, feeling her sister's power wash over the mansion. Damn it, she said as Tsubaki knocked and stepped through the door. Aichu, Serapho-sama is here. Tsubaki announced before the telltale scream was heard. Sotan. I have come to see you. The annoying scream was heard before Tsubaki was thrown to the side and Sona was nearly crushed in the dreaded hug of her sister. I was so happy to come here, Sotan. It has been so long since I last saw you and you never write me. I was getting sad but then realized you probably don't have the time to write me damn paperwork, why does that exist? And then it went on and on for about 30 minutes. Sona was just happy that the Leviathan let go of her after only 2 minutes. She sighed and ignored the inane drabble of her sister for the amount of time that it was going on. So how have you been, Sotan? Serapho finally asked. The Citriera sighed again, though it was in relief at the fact that the Leviathan finally stopped babbling. Just fine, Nisama. Now, why are you here? Serapho looked like a knife just went through her chest. She even placed her hand over her heart. Oh, Sotan, you wound me so. Why are you so mean to me? She then stopped acting like a child when she saw Sona's eyebrow twitch. I came here to see you for the annual report. I also noticed that you got a queen yesterday and wanted to greet the newest peerage member of yours. Sona sighed again and rubbed her forehead. You won't be able to greet him as he is still recovering from the turning. She then placed her right hand on Naruto's left arm, drawing Serapho's attention to the teen that slept on the bed. He's had a rough time as of late yesterday. He is a Kikbi no Kitsune and had a rough travel to this world. I resurrected him around 22:30 late last night. He was thrown through the dimensional gap to get here and it did a number on his body. Sona explained briefly. Not even noticing that she rubbed his arm in a soothing gesture. Serapho did notice it and narrowed her eyes at the blonde. Wondering what he had done to earn Sona's slight affection, she asked. You said he traveled to this world. What do you mean, Sotan? Sona's sweat dropped and gazed into her sister's eyes. He's from a different dimension, Nisama. I found that out about 30 minutes after resurrecting him, he was in a critical condition. The Ouroboros dragon goddess stepped in to help heal him, she even said that he is her chosen champion. She threatened this world should he be treated as a slave. She explained, which made the Leviathan gape at her. Chosen champion, Serapho queried after a few minutes. Though the sound made the earth rumble slightly. How the fuck did this escape our intel? Ejuka-chan would have notified us about the Infinity Goddess having a champion. So how did he not know? Sona coldly stared at her sister's eyes. You do realize that I'm not that high on the chain of command, so I wouldn't know. My guess is that it was recent, and since it happened in another dimension we wouldn't be able to pick up on it. Seraphil blanched and nodded after a moment. I guess you're right, damn, I should have realized that when you said he was from another world. Our eyes only reach to this world at the moment, even though we know there are more out there. Sona sighed again and took her glasses off to rub the bridge of her nose. It was the first time I ever heard of it. She said. Seraphil sheepishly rubbed the back of her head. It's a high-profile kind of thing. Need to know basis, so only the higher-ups of our faction know about it. Though Heaven and the Grigori higher-ups also know about it. The Leviathan explained, then turned her gaze back to the boy. He's cute though. I want to exclaim kawaii and rub those ears. Are you sure he's not related to Yasaka? Those features are strikingly similar. She asked. Sona nodded and replied in the affirmative. Tsubaki brought in tea for the two a few moments afterwards. Sona also gave the report that she was expected to give to the Leviathan. It took nearly an hour, but it was only the verbal report. She would have to give the written one by the evening. It was what she had been working on the night before until Naruto appeared. Seraphil also questioned her about the boy a little more, but she couldn't give much information about him. Not until she learned more about the blonde would she be able to give the information that was needed. And even then, it would only be info that would not be a breach of trust. She had decided that after she moved him to her home. She still seemed to hear a disembodied voice speak to her every now and then. It was distinctly female voice, not the voice of Kurama as she could now recognize it, but a different and altogether divine type of voice. It seemed to encompass her in a soothing and motherly way. She wouldn't realize that it was the All-Creator's voice for quite a few centuries. Sona sighed in relief that evening as Seraphil finally left her home. Finally, damn it, why do the four Satans have to be so weird? Is it the price for being so powerful? Her mental question would be answered after a while by her new queen. Tsubaki had also sighed in relief after the woman had left. She shared her king's view about the Leviathan. At least she was serious this time. That's more than can be said about the usual visits, right Kaichu? Tsubaki asked Sona. You're right, unfortunately, it won't hold for long. Sona replied before turning to return to her new queen's bedside. I wonder when he will wake up. She said, knowing that her bishop followed her. Tsubaki was still wary about the young man, but wouldn't show that to her king. That remains to be seen, Kaichu. The bishop replied. She was the diplomatic type of bishop as she so chose to be for her king. Rias thought she was the queen of Sona's peerage, but would soon know that she wasn't. Sona hummed in agreement. As she sat down beside the bed once more. Tsubaki grimaced slightly, also at the fact that Rias wanted to meet her king tomorrow. Kaichu, Rias wants to meet with you tomorrow. Will it be at the school or here, or is my liege even willing to meet with her? She asked. Sona sighed as she hated being called with such respect in private. I'll meet with her here. My formal office, and we can have that chess match she so wants. She'll never beat me, not with how she plays. She replied. Tsubaki nodded and turned to leave. She headed for the kitchen, knowing that dinner would need to be prepared soon. I will prepare dinner, Sona Kaichu. Would you prefer something? She asked. Sona thought for a moment before replying. Breakfast food sounds good, Tsubaki, whatever you feel like making in that area. Tsubaki agreed before leaving the room. Though she did leave her familiar to watch over her king. She was still leery about the young man. Inner universe of Naruto's soul. Pedestal of the Queen Peace. Naruto sighed as he gazed at the thing that tied him in a bond with the young lady he couldn't get out of his mind. This is clearly an enslavement and resurrection artifact. Though this one seems different, he quietly said, approaching the mutated Queen Piece. He slowly brushed his right hand across the bottom of the chess piece. How peculiar. To feel such energy wafting from you. I will have to see what this means. He said after a moment as the piece seemed to hum at his words. He then turned his gaze to the opposite side of the pillar he stood on. Your altar is in shambles, Ouroboros. I must wonder about whether it was from the apocalyptic surge or something else. Only a few know about that time. His words seemed to freeze the area around him, but he continued to walk around both the Queen Piece and the mural of the Ouroboros. His inner mindscape stayed frozen for a few moments, though he paid no attention to that. To think that the goddess of infinity would finally choose a champion and that she would choose you, it's quite baffling, though I can see some merit from it. His own voice said from beyond the mural. Naruto sighed and turned to look at the origin of his voice. Hello, Shade. I trust everything is being fixed. He said to the shadow version of himself. It was a shade, a being that could not be seen clearly in the material realm. Shades could only exist partially in the dead of night and can only truly exist in limbo. The shadow being chuckled and its yellow eyes squinted in amusement. Of course, summoner. Your body is being tended to by the one who turned you into a devil, though the other servant is a touch jumpy. That one even left a creature to watch over the leader. It seems to think that you will cause harm to the leader. The voice turned from his own to a multitude of voices as it spoke. He really hated summoning shades, as the beings were even more unpredictable than himself. Though they did follow the contract. He couldn't use anything else while unconscious. I see, very well. You may go now. He called out to it as he turned back to the mural. Now what can you tell me, altar of a forgotten domain? He asked himself quietly, not even noticing the sudden absence of the other being. His research would take some time, but he did open a full connection to his outer senses. Just to be safe that the being didn't lie. I really don't trust them, he quietly said. He could have shouted and none would hear it. For his inner universe was beyond the reach of any other unless he invited them inside. Not even Kurama or the All-Creator could get access. Naruto's room. 20 minutes after Serafo left. Sona looked at her new queen for a moment before turning to gaze at the darkened corner of the room. The sun was in its setting phase and the shadows it cast grabbed her attention. She could have sworn she saw someone there, but it appeared to have vanished. She frowned and adjusted her glasses slightly by pushing them closer to her eyes. She felt like she was being watched by something from there but couldn't see anything. Even Tsubaki's familiar was gazing at the area. That is strange, she quietly said, but stopped as she heard Kurama speak to her. He spoke through the bond that the Queen Peace had with her. A shade. They are beings that only exist in the darkest depths of any world. The dead of night is normally the only time one can see them. They appear to be people, made of shadows. Their true existence only exists in limbo, however. They can only appear in darkness. She frowned further at the small explanation. It means that Naruto summoned a few to guard him while he deals with his own inner world to recover. Sona appeared confused for a moment before asking a single question. Are you talking about the silhouettes of people that appear at night? Hi. Shades are the darkest of beings, only existing on the material plane for a few moments normally. Naruto has a contract with the realm of Limbo and can thus summon them. He hates using them, but they are the only thing he can summon while unconscious. The fox said, before sighing. It just means that he doesn't trust what is happening right now. I can't reach him while he is in there, not unless he invites me. Sona nodded and kept an eye on the area for a moment. Not seeing anything else, she turned back to the recovering form of Naruto. May I ask you something about him? Just a general overview of his character, if I may. Kurama hummed while keeping an eye on how well Naruto was healing. This is going to take a while, although, if she could do something to help him stabilize. His thought carried out before he replied. Naruto is a very strange person. He wears many masks in the outer world and will not let anyone truly know him easily. He is intelligent and can read people in a way that makes everyone seem like an open book. He is also resilient in his ways, to the point that no one can change his mind once it's set. He doesn't believe in taking much easy and is more than willing to work for his keep. Kurama's voice was quiet through the bond, almost like he was recalling a lot. He is unusually kind to most people, though he doesn't show it much. In his usual persona, he acts cold and uncaring of most things. He is more than willing to kill those he fights, though he occasionally won't. He is a true commander-class shinobi and can devise assassinations that even the best cannot figure out. He is a warrior, though he is best suited to quick annihilations and stealth. Kurama then sighed, and Sona could feel like it was a military bio. He is the best that his home has had in nearly a century. His views are moral, but he will not let his enemies escape if he can help it. He is fast enough that none could escape, though as I said, he will occasionally let some go. The fox finished, and Sona paused for a few moments. You make it sound like he is a special operative for a military. Is he one, and is he really able to assassinate so quickly without any evidence telling it was him? She asked, feeling a small tug in her gut. It was a type of fear she had only felt a few times, mainly when Seraphul's pawn was nearby. Hi. He was the commander of his home's Black Ops division. He got that rank when he was 6 years old. His abilities are what one would say are a master assassin's. Not even I can recall how many he has killed in such a way before he turned 8. His strength is beyond even me now, and he is fast, quiet, and able to observe everything around him in a critical way that even the best of those who are stealthy will never be able to sneak up on him. Kurama rubbed his throat, not used to talking so much. Though he was willing to give that information to her, it was still a pain. He will need either a few days to get back to consciousness or a skilled healer. The bijj finished. Sona nodded and turned to go eat as she heard Tsubaki call that dinner was ready. I'll heal him in a while. I have a few ways to do so. I will check with you later, Kurama. As the door closed, Kurama sighed. I haven't talked so much in centuries, not even Naruto talks to me to the point that my throat hurts. Then again, he doesn't need to. It'll be good that he can finally shed that idiot persona. My friend has finally returned. He then laid his head down, choosing to take a nap. Tsubaki's familiar looked around. Not even knowing that what Sona was talking to would not be able to appear in the corporeal world for some time. Sona's personal office. 30 minutes later. Are you sure we can trust this boy, Kaichu? Tsubaki asked as Sona was grabbing a few tomes of magic that she had in the manor. Honestly, I'm not sure yet. Though there is this strange feeling that I can trust him with anything. Sona replied, putting a tome back on her shelves while frowning at the bookcase. She looked through all of the books before asking. Where is our tome on restoration? Tsubaki nodded at Sona's explanation before thinking of where she last saw the book. If I recall correctly, Seraful-sama had to borrow it last year. I'll contact her to see if she still has need of it. Sona sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose again. No, if she hasn't returned it yet, then it's collecting dust at Ka-sen's retreat. She then turned to look at her bishop. Are you still going to your sister's this evening? Tsubaki frowned but knew that Sona needed some time alone. She would leave her familiar behind to watch over her king, however. Hi Kaichu. I'm only worried about you if that boy should try anything. Sona nodded and felt relief that Tsubaki wouldn't be here. I'll be fine, Tsubaki. He is in no shape to try anything right now, so you don't need to worry. She then turned to her desk. Tell your sister I will see her soon about offering her a place among us. Tsubaki nodded and smiled. Her sister wasn't really related to her, but they had been friends long enough to consider that they were. I will tell Momo. She will appreciate it, Kaichu. Tsubaki then left. She didn't notice Sona's sigh of relief. This'll be the first time I've ever tried healing like this. Bearskin contact. I just hope he doesn't wake up while I'm doing this. Sona mentally perked herself up and headed to the bedroom that housed Naruto. Loosening her tie a little as she walked. Sona stepped through the doorway of Naruto's new room and sighed. Kurama appeared to have been waiting as he spoke to her through the bond. Is there a reason that your shirt is askew slightly? Sona sighed again before replying. I have to use an old type of healing we devils know. My tome on the School of Restoration is missing for now, so I'll have to use pure mana and bearskin contact to heal him. She didn't know how the fox could see, but put it off to some strange thing about the seal that held him. She then unbuttoned her shirt and proceeded to remove every article of clothing she had on her. Kurama grimaced slightly, though she could not see it. Yeah, that's old. Though many seem to prefer it in the supernatural realms. Sona nodded as she removed her skirt and started to remove her socks. Many of the young devils prefer to use this way, but I can't say that I do. This is the first time I've ever tried it. She finished by removing her black panties. Her hand would have gone to cover her mound, though the fox stopped her. I see you don't need to worry about it. I don't care enough about nudity to gawk at you. I've never worn clothes before, but then again, I'm too large for normal clothing. I will help you through the process, just don't be tense. If you do not focus enough on your energy, you will more than likely cause harm to both him and yourself. Kurama said. The fox caught the connection he had to visuals in the outer world. You don't have to worry, I've stopped my sight for now. Just relax and get Naruto out of his own clothing. Do be warned however, his clothing needs to be pressed in certain areas before they can be removed. If not, they'll likely electrocute you. The bitch then walked her through the process of getting Naruto's clothes off. She could see a lot of kanji and other runes in the clothing. Though she didn't ask about them, she would wait for the young man to tell her himself. When she had his trust. Naruto's inner universe. A few moments after he stopped studying the mural. Someone is using BBC restorative magic. I'll need to talk to Kurama. He said and turned to look once more at the queen piece that resided there. I suppose it would be that young lady. This thing is getting slightly more stable now. He then turned back to the mural. You, however, are very different. He approached the center of the giant pillar he stood on and sighed. This power has only been seen once before, according to Toussaint's books. An anomaly. He then sighed and started to leave the place by fading out of it. I'll look into you more later. XXX. Kurama was focusing on keeping Naruto's chakra stable and did not see the blonde approach him due to his eyes being closed. He did notice, however, when Naruto wrested the stabilization from him. You've returned. The fox spoke. Naruto sighed and nodded when the fox looked down at him. I've been looking into the two new props. That piece she used appeared in my sanctum. There is also another there, one that hasn't been seen in a few cycles. Kurama raised one eyebrow, waiting for Naruto to explain. Naruto continued after a few moments, readjusting the flow of his mana to match his chakra. A dilapidated mural of the Ouroboros dragon goddess, appearing as an altar to her. I haven't been able to fully look through it, but it is a blessing. It seems to give the ability of being a paradox, though I can't be too sure until I test it. Naruto finished and closed his eyes fully. I also noticed the 2 changes you did. I wanted those eyes gone, but I guess we might need them at some point. And please, don't get me started on the fact that you changed me to a yokai." Kurama grimaced and backed away slightly. "I apologize, but the second change was necessary. Without it, you would have perished in the void." The eyes. "I couldn't let the last pieces of my 2 sense visionary abilities disappear." He made sure that Naruto wouldn't move before he spoke. Naruto hummed and continued keeping his energies in order. "I can see the reason for the eyes, and I suppose the travel through the dimensional gap would require the other change, even if it was just to survive. Now I'll have to get used to having the appendages." He sighed and went quiet. "Well, at least he isn't trying to beat me. But that could be because he's busy. Who am I kidding? He can multitask." Kurama sighed after his thought and opened another communication with Sona. "I'll have to let her know he's back." Sona's manor, Naruto's room. 21:34. Shortly after Sona started healing Naruto. Sona blushed as she lay with Naruto and continued to heal him. She was focused on the healing, but her face flushed in subconscious embarrassment and slight arousal. She barely noticed when a new telepathic link was established with her, but didn't jump at the voice of Kurama. He has returned from his inner world and is currently working on keeping his energy stable enough for you to finish. I keep failing to remember that he has 2 different energy types, so you can now loosen your focus. She sighed in slight relief, but grimaced at the thought of the young man, knowing whether she was naked. She was about to ask if he did know, but Kurama already answered. He is aware that you are using skin contact for the healing. He actually knows multiple types of restorative magic, but this one isn't used much. His knowledge of spell crafting is near the level of the ancients of our homeworld, though he doesn't know everything. I doubt he'll awake in time to see you, but he wouldn't care at the nudity. He is still a hardcore shinobi. She grimaced and felt herself heat up a little. It had always been a problem for her when people knew she was naked. It seemed to ignite her arousal quite a bit. She tried to keep it from influencing her, but it still made her body slightly suffer with desire. She sighed when Kurama broke the connection to her mind. He even seemed to have disappeared from the bond, though she knew he wasn't gone. Well, he is at least focused more on keeping his mana in check still. What is he thinking? She asked herself, not knowing if speaking aloud would make the young man hear her. She didn't know that he was used to multitasking, even inside his head. She wouldn't learn that for a while, however. She fell asleep nearly an hour after he returned to the seal. Sona's manor, Naruto's room. 19th of June, 7:30. Sona groaned slightly as she awoke and reached to the end table beside the bed for her glasses. As she put them on, she looked around the room. "Where is he?" she mentally asked, not noticing that the balcony door was open and the blonde was sitting on the balcony. His voice startled her and made her blush slightly at its sound. "You might want to consider dressing yourself, miss." She looked to the balcony that was all across the manor on the 3rd floor and she saw him sitting with his back to the door. She jumped at fully remembering she was naked. She then used her magic to dress herself in her preferred relaxation outfit. A black tank top underneath a pristine gray t-shirt that had an ice blue snowflake on it over her chest. Gray cargo shorts with a brown belt and finishing off with white socks that reached her knees. She heard him chuckle and looked back to him. "It is surprising to find another user of mana, though I suppose I shouldn't be." He then stood and she recognized the outfit he was wearing. It was the same one she had to take off him last night to heal him. He turned and the morning sunlight made his eyes seem to glow slightly. The eyes were still the changed ones she had seen the other night. One black and red and the other completely purple. The symbols in the eyes made her wonder about whether they were a sacred gear. He then stepped through the door and his eyes seemed to glow more in the shade of the room. "Before we begin, might I know the name of the beauty who saved my worthless corpse?" he asked calmly. Sona was still blushing slightly at the sound of his voice, but was able to respond. "Sona Citri, and I already know your name." Her breath hitched when he chuckled again. "And I doubt you are worthless, assassin." Naruto scoffed and told her off. "I am more worthless than the dirt on my sandals when I appeared here, Miss Citri. Considering I am now, technically a slave to you." His words made her gulp slightly. "I should rip your heart out for that, but I am at least civil enough to hear you out." His tone went even colder than her sister's most powerful ice spells, and she nearly felt like running. She didn't, however, as the fact he said he was now a slave made her bristle. "You're not a slave." She nearly shouted and took a deep breath. "I don't know what makes you think that, but my family has instilled that we treat our servants as though they are our friends. Much like the Gremory family, we do not abuse our peerage." She explained calmly. She had also stood up from the bed, she only noticed now that he was nearly a head taller than her. Naruto hummed and gazed into her eyes for a few moments. It made her feel like he was reading everything about her and she nearly forgot that Kurama said he could do that. "Say that I believe your statement. What would you do to ensure that I can trust your words, Miss Citri?" he asked and continued to stare into her eyes. She felt like she was before a being that was even more than the god she knew about. His eyes seemed to radiate power on a level she couldn't identify. It made her feel fear, yet also arousal. Devils found power attractive, after all. She took a breath and slowly calmed down whilst releasing it. I don't know how the words I have spoken can be trusted by you, but I will make sure not to make you feel like you need to take action against me. She breathed again and stared directly into his eyes with a determination he had only seen in the mirror before. The Queen piece entails that you are my right hand, my second in command for the peerage and in raiding games. You hold power over the peerage whilst I am away, and no other member can take that from you. She watched him blink, and he raised his eyes skyward. He paused for a moment, getting his thoughts together. Are you saying that the piece is related to chess? He asked her. She nodded and wondered how he knew of the game. I see. He then turned to walk back out on the balcony. Kurama explained to me that you are a denizen of this world's underworld. A devil, if I recall. The fact that you have clearly stated your family is one of a few that do not enslave others is a small comfort, he said as he stopped at the balcony's railing. I can only presume that others do not do so. He sighed before turning back to her. His eyes alight with an intelligent gaze. Very well, I will work with you for the time being. You are the only one who can teach me of this world, and if I feel like you would abuse this bond we share, I will make sure that the underworld will not survive. So, let's try to get along, Miss Citri. He said in a cold voice, though it wasn't as frozen as before. She then knew that he would need a friend in this world. And she decided to be that for him. To make him see that she would never use him as a tool or a slave. She would not know for a while that he could read her thoughts lightly. She didn't even notice his eyes widen in slight surprise. Kuo Academy, Occult Research Clubroom. 8 o'clock. Within the old school building of Kuo's illustrious academy, the clubroom that belonged to Ria's Gremory, sat Kaneko Taoju. Her amber-colored eyes stared out the window of the club's meeting room. Her eyes were narrowed and the hair on the back of her neck was statically standing straight out. Ria's Gremory stared at the young Nekishu in worry. What is it, Kaneko? Ria's asked, her tone showing that she was concerned with the young girl's stance. Kaneko didn't answer for a few minutes and the pause made Ria's even more worried. The white-haired girl replied after what felt like a long while. There is a Senjutsu user in Kuo. Her tone was cold to the average listener, but Ria's could hear the fear in the girl's voice. Ria's grimaced slightly, knowing that this fear of Kaneko's was personal. She waited a moment before responding. We will let Sona know, I have a meeting with her today, you may come along, if it will help. Kaneko sighed and then nodded. Arigato butchu. She said, and Ria's could pick up a slight bit of hope mixed in with the gratitude. They wouldn't realize that the one Kaneko sensed would be there as well until after they would meet him. The door opened and Akeno walked in. She looked pristine as usual, but Ria's could also see worry in her eyes. Butchu, good morning. Ria's nodded to the greeting, though the Gremory raised her own eyes at Akeno's. Ria's then asked her newly arrived queen, whilst thinking something strange was going on. Good morning, Akeno. What is you making that expression? She was good at a lot of things concerning magic, but she wasn't the best censor around. Akeno paused and grimaced fully. There is a large source of power in town, it's coming from Sona's house and it doesn't feel like anyone we know. She said slowly, her voice taking a very worried tone. Ria's narrowed her eyes. Alright, something's going on, and for it to cause these two worry and fear like this we need to move. She then stood and crafted a teleportation circle. Let's go. Kaneko, be ready for a fight. Akeno support role, with me. She commanded and then stepped into the circle. The other two followed as soon as her command was given. This happened just before Kiba walked through the door to let Ria's know of the meeting's location change. Sona Citri's manor, main entryway. 8:20. Sona walked into the main entryway of her manor, having felt a teleportation circle appearing there. The room was a bit of a classic Victorian style, as was most of the manor. The floor was made of marble, and the pillars holding the second floor walkway was made of a lighter shade of marble. The walls were of stone and held a gargoyle over the door that led outside. There were a few paintings hanging from the walls, some of Europe, others of Japan. The windows were a Victorian British style and slightly tinted to reduce the glare of the sun. Naruto silently followed her and gazed upon the circle that was forming. It was of the Gremory family and he noticed that it was taking a little longer than should be. Barriers, at least she knows not to leave her home undefended. He thought after spreading his senses out around the property. Sona stopped 10 feet away from the circle, still standing on the stairs. Her eyes narrowed, but she waited for the guests to arrive. She didn't know that there would be one more, but Naruto was able to pick up on that fact. Sona watched as 3 forms appeared in the circle and her eye twitched when they adopted a ready stance. You're early, Ria, she said, and almost smirked when the 3 jumped to look at her. Ria sighed, not noticing Naruto standing behind Sona or that Kaneko and Akeno froze as the small amount of power he unconsciously released washed over them. Sona, thank the Mau, we have come to let you know that there is a very strong presence here. Ria said, before noticing the blonde male yokai behind her. Ria's also noticed the amount of tails he had and gulped. Never mind, you already know, she said, and then looked to Kaneko. She noticed the girl tensed up and was staring directly at the new person. Sona sighed and decided that this meeting would be held in her office. Come, we will convene in my office. She then turned around and started heading up the stairs. Ria's almost sighed when the young man followed Sona and motioned for her queen and Rook to follow her. She followed the two and gulped again. Yep, Kikbi. Great, I should have called Ani-san. Her thoughts then turned to the reason the blonde was here and why he was following Sona. The personal office of Sona Citri was more like a library than anything else. Bookshelves reached across the walls and a few were standing out away from the walls by 2 yards. The shelves were filled with many books and tomes of the magical arts. There were only 2 windows, each behind and to the sides of Sona's ebony-colored desk. The ceiling was nearly 2 stories high. As the door opened, Sona stepped through with Naruto following her. He made a mental note to spend some time in the room as quite a few tomes caught his eye. As well as the history books and a few others. Sona continued to her desk, still wearing her casual outfit, while Naruto had taken off his Haori before the Gremory group arrived. Sona proceeded to circle around her desk to her leather office chair. It looked comfortable to Naruto, the leather was in pristine condition and cushioned. It was black, with a few purple symbols on the backrest. He would later learn that they were the Citri family symbol, but were colored to Sona's preference. Rias, Kaneko and Akeno entered shortly after Sona sat down. Naruto had decided to stand at the right side of the desk, facing it, so that he could see all 4 ladies. His tail seemed to sway slightly in a relaxed manner, though Sona could tell that it was a ruse. He was ready to move at a moment's notice. He really is trained to kill in a second. I think I got lucky on this one. Sorry Rias, you lucked out. Sona thought as she gazed at her queen. She then turned to the other 3 and spoke. Before we begin, Rias. I would like to introduce you to the newest member of my peerage. She then gestured to Naruto and smirked slightly. My queen, Naruto Uzumaki. Ria's eyes widened and she turned to look at the young man. His gaze turned directly to her and his strange eyes made her feel like she was being judged. Wait a minute, queen, she thought after a moment. I thought Tsubaki was your queen. She exclaimed. Sona chuckled and brushed the red-haired teen off. You never asked, so I didn't see fit to tell you otherwise. Sona then pulled out her chess set and set it out. It was an old fantasy-styled set, the board was the standard black and white, the pieces however, were purple and blue. The kings were styled to look like females in a monarchy setting, while the purple queen was a male. The rest of the pieces ranged from witches to soldiers. The rooks looked like actual castles, and the knights were figures atop horses and dressed in differing sets of armor. Rias had only seen this set used once before, when Sona got herself out of her own engagement. She knew that Sona valued this set, as it was a gift from Sona's grandmother. It was the last gift Sona ever received from her, as the woman had passed on a few months after. It was rumored that the old Citri matriarch was murdered, though no one knew if that was the truth. Rias felt a pang at the fact that Sona at least knew the woman. As she had only heard stories of her own grandmother. She put that thought away for later and decided to get some information. So when did this young man become your queen? She asked as she moved a blue pawn. Sona would always use the purple or black pieces in a normal set. Sona started by moving a knight and answered. The evening of the 17th of June, 2 days ago. She then glanced at Naruto to see him looking at the young Kaneko with a critical eye. What is he thinking about? She mentally asked herself. Naruto glanced to her as though he had heard her question and motioned that he would explain shortly. She had always been able to pick up on certain things through the body language of others as well as the eyes. Though she had quite a bit of trouble with his right now. Rias thought of her next move for a moment, then moved another pawn before fishing for more. I see. Is he related to the yokai leader somehow? She thought he was, as their hair color was nearly identical. Though she didn't know where his eyes came from or why they looked like the eyes of both a demon and a god. Naruto answered for Sona and his voice made the Gremory group blush. I have no living relatives. They all perished on the night of my birth, my clan decades before that. He said casually, as though he was only talking about the weather. Rias grimaced, while Kaneko's eyes widened slightly. Kaneko knew that when a yokai talked of a clan, they meant their entire race within an area. There were more than 3 clans of Nico in Japan, one was down to 2 members. Her own clan. There were over 20 clans of Kitsune in the world, and 3 of them were also nearly extinct due to wars with other beings. The leader of the yokai faction was also one such Kitsune, as only the woman and her daughter remained. She could tell he wasn't related, as she could smell his element. Yusaka was a light kitsune. This man was a shadow type. It made her tense even more, as the shadow types were said to have been eradicated centuries ago. Sona caught the girl tensing even more than before and asked a young newly made first year. Is something the matter, Kaneko? She then moved a pawn and waited for the young Nekashu to answer. Rias moved a knight and turned to look at her rook. She winced as she saw Kaneko fear the man before them even more than she thought possible. Kaneko froze for a few minutes, still staring at Naruto. Even Akeno turned to her when she did not answer for a while. The chess match continued for a few turns, with Rias losing more than a few pieces, before Kaneko asked Naruto a question that would break her if he seemed to fall into her list of the usual senjutsu users. How can you deal with it? She asked lowly and continued with a second question. And how is it that a Kage Kitsune is still in existence? Sona moved her queen piece, taking one of Ria's bishop pieces. Ria sighed afterwards and pouted slightly as the witch-looking piece was removed from the board. Naruto raised an eyebrow before putting a small amount of chakra into his eyes. He saw that Kaneko was afraid of natural energy and was nearly to the point of pissing herself with the fact that his mana element was shadows. He then answered her first question. You speak of senjutsu as though it were blight and wonder how I can deal with the malice of the world. It is simple, little kitten. He then allowed his connection with nature to fully open and a dark purple pigment surrounded his eyes while his pupils changed to look like a figure eight. Rias then tensed as she felt the pressure of power fully fall on her. Though it wasn't his full power, they would not learn that for a while. Kaneko even fell to her knees as the power washed over them. I have dealt with hatred all my life. When the people around you throw it at you, you learn how to deal with it early on. Especially when you are conditioned to deal with it. He spoke lowly and the words sounded ominous to all of them. Even Sona found it to be dark. He then continued. When hatred turns to a war for survival, you learn that even the malice of worlds feels empty. When that malice is compared to the darkness of sentient beings, then the hatred of a planet feels like a tame kitten throwing a hissy fit. He then closed his connection to nature, allowing the others to breathe properly again. Sona would later notice that her property seemed livelier in terms of plant life and that the usual birds would stay there for more than a few hours. Kaneko breathed a little easier and felt the natural energy around the property seemed to purify. It almost made her moan at the fact that the air was cleaner here now, but she was still trying to catch her breath. She had looked down when his senjutsu power was flooding the area but looked back up into his eyes after she caught her breath. She saw something in his strange eyes and it almost made her breath hitch again. His eyes showed someone who was in slight turmoil but was not willing to fall into the darkness. He then asked her a question that not even Rias would dare ask. Now, what has you so afraid, young one? Rias froze, as did Akeno. Sona just tilted her head slightly and continued to gaze at Naruto. What are you thinking, Naruto? Sona asked mentally, not realizing that Kurama could hear her thought. The bitch answered a few moments later while Kaneko was trying to get herself together from the personal question. He's going through his I must help this one phase. It happens fairly often and only around those that will become good friends later. The fox answered, nearly making Sona jump in fright. The others couldn't hear him as he was communicating through the bond once more. Sona nodded as everyone else was staring at Kaneko now. So they wouldn't question why she did. Kaneko took another breath before answering Naruto's question. Most who use senjutsu go mad with power and become filled with hatred at nearly all things. She said slowly and in a voice that most would think was a monotone. Naruto could feel her emotions however and knew that she was afraid of the hatred. He closed his eyes and sighed. So, you are willing to cut yourself off from producing children just so that you won't go crazy. You are a strange one, little Nico. His words caught them all off guard, even Kaneko was confused. She then asked what they all wanted to. What do you mean, cutting off on producing children? Naruto sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. And here I thought you would know that. He then gazed directly into Kaneko's eyes. By not using the natural energy around you, by not drawing it in, you are, in effect, killing your ability to have children. You are choking your biological processing to the point that it will kill your ability in a few years by not drawing in that energy. He then pulled a tome from his pocket dimension. Seemingly pulled it from the depths of a void or conjured it from nothing. He opened the tome and turned through the pages until he found the one he was looking for. This tome is on the history of yokai and says this. For those yokai that do not take in the natural energy around them, in accordance with the pact set forth by Lady Amaterasu, they give up their ability to produce offspring and eventually get weaker as time goes on. Even if they are not trained to accept that the malice of any world is not really a problem, they must at least draw in the energy, otherwise they succumb to madness and eventual death of entire lines. This is taken from the contract of the sun goddess, Amaterasu. Chapter 34 of Yokai History. He then closed the tome and handed it to Kaneko. Keep it, I have 13 other copies. It is written in an older dialect of my home's language, which is similar to Japan's. Translating it should not be difficult. He then turned to watch the chess match once more. Hineko accepted the book and her eyes widened slightly. She was able to read it and noticed the name of the author. It was the same author who wrote most of the educational books for Yokai and had been named as the most scholarly Yokai to date. One Hinori Katsumoto. She hadn't been able to read the books or scrolls much due to her sister not being able to get them while they were on the streets. And the devil that Kuroka was a servant of didn't care about their education. Only their power and abilities. She brought the book to her chest and gazed back into it. Naruto. Arigato. She said in a quiet tone. Naruto nodded but kept his eyes on the chess match. Or at least, that is what everyone else thought. His eyes were actually taking in everything that they were doing. Their expressions and actions, plus how the two players were strategizing. It was a skill he had to pick up when he first became an Anbu. Peripheral vision was paid almost as much attention to as the main focus, and even the surroundings of the operative had to be monitored when those surroundings could not be seen. His abilities with Sage Mode were even better now than when he fought Nagato's Paths of Pain. He could sense everything around him even before that, but it was now on a level that most could never get close to. The match continued a few moments later. Though it wouldn't matter much, as Rias lost once again to her fellow devil. 3 hours later. Sona sighed as she watched the teleportation circle of Rias disappear. The main point of the meeting wasn't even talked about much. The problem was that stray devils and many fallen were appearing in town. She had hoped that Rias would have had the sense to come up with a plan, but again, it wasn't even really brought up. It seems that girl has too many problems to focus on what is necessary. She won't make a good leader if she can't focus on the problems of now. Naruto spoke and made Sona turn to him. You noticed that she wasn't paying much attention after you were introduced. She normally puts on the act that she is, but right now Sona sighed again and turned to head back to her office. She then turned back as another circle appeared and sighed in relief. Tsubaki's back. Naruto looked at the new circle and took note that it was the same symbol that Sona's office chair had. It must be her family's circle, the barriers are letting this one through without issue. He then saw a black-haired young lady appear. She also wore glasses, though hers were square, and he took note of her stance. Spear user. This must be Sona's bishop. He thought and noticed that she had tensed up when she saw him. Good. She is wary, which means she is ready to defend Sona at a moment's notice. Sona's eye twitched before she spoke to her bishop. Hello Tsubaki, how was your visit with Momo? Her question was answered with a nod. Good, may I introduce to you Naruto Uzumaki. He is the queen of this peerage and has agreed to work with us. She then turned back to continue her way to her office. He has much to learn of this world and I have agreed to help my second become educated enough on it for the start of the school year. Please, try to get along with him. Tsubaki watched as Naruto turned to follow their king and responded. Hi Kaichu. She then followed them and made note of the time. She'd have to cook soon or order lunch. She would ask when they reached the office, not knowing if Naruto would even know what he wanted. At least Kaichu is still alive and I sense that Rias was here earlier. She thought with a bit of relief. The Cult Research Clubroom. 12:40. Udo Kiba had waited for Rias and the other two to return. He didn't know why they had left but felt that it had to do with Sona's new queen. Tsubaki had told him last night, as well as the change of place and time for the meeting. They had passed each other by while Kiba was going on a contract. As the circle lit up, he noticed the three return and that Kaneko had a book with her. But you have returned. He said and was about to tell Rias of what he had learned when she spoke. Yeah, we went to Sona's place. She said before taking her chair and rubbing her forehead. She acquired a queen and we spoke about the current problems we've been having with strays and fallen. She then grabbed her paperwork and started getting to work. The kendo had moved to stand behind her king's right shoulder as was her usual place in the room. Kaneko moved to her usual haunt and proceeded to open the book she had with her. Biba sighed and went to hand over his report on the contract. He then moved to the couch across from Kaneko and caught her eyes being focused on her book. Too much to talk. Can't say that that's unusual. He thought. Kaneko rarely talked anyways, so the fact that she was engrossed in a book wasn't much for him to think about. Though he could barely read the cover as he wasn't good with old Japanese. He waited for Rias to get finished and would give the verbal report before going to work on his swordplay. Sona's office, 1300 hours. Naruto gazed outside of the left window, behind Sona's desk. He listened as Tsubaki gave a small report about a weak stray devil trying to attack her while she spent time with another girl. So by leaving one's king and forsaking the bond, one becomes a hideous beast as the power of the underworld takes hold of their mind. It shows that servitude can carry a small perk and also shows that many are not willful enough to stop it from happening, should they do so. He thought before turning back to the two. Harama responded, sounding like he had finally recovered from all the power he used up. Morons, in other words. Naruto nodded but was pulled from his thoughts when Tsubaki said she would order lunch and asked what they wanted. Sona paused for a moment and replied. Pizza sounds alright, Tsubaki. Supreme. Tsubaki nodded before turning to the blonde. He didn't even think, just said the same. Don't know what pizza is, but why not? Was his mental question. Tsubaki nodded before leaving. Sona then turned to him and asked about what had been bothering her since Rias had met with him. Naruto, would you mind explaining about your helping of Kaneko this morning? I am curious about that book you had. Naruto sighed and proceeded to the chair in front of her desk. That book was one of the few I possess dealing with the races of Yakai. I cannot tell you much about the author, but I can guess she is famous in this world to Yakai. He paused for a moment, looking to the ceiling. Yakai, in general, need their chakra and sage abilities in order to survive. Without them, they are as good as dead. Not using senjutsu creates many problems. By not taking in the energy of nature, they lose the ability to remain of sound mind and eventually lose the ability to procreate. When they do not whilst young they never gain the second ability. If she starts her heat cycles soon then her chances vanish even faster. He explained before looking back to her. I didn't answer her second question as the only thing I know about the shadow type kitsune is that they went extinct. As you may have learned, I was not a Yakai before coming here. He said and Sona nodded to him. I would have to check the full Citri library for more info on the Yakai faction. I possess only a few snippets here. She said and decided to grab her chess set again. Do you know how to play? She asked. He nodded but felt like this would be a defining moment for them later on. Hi, though I haven't played much. My home was more focused on shogi and go than on chess. He decided to let her set it up and knew that he would be able to win this match. If she played like she did with Rias. Once it was set up, he began by moving a blue knight to the right from that same side. It was only the opening move and his own style mimicked his style in combat. To react instead of plan out everything beforehand. Sona stared at the chessboard, her eyes slightly widened. Her mouth open in surprise. The chess match had only lasted for nearly 25 minutes, but Naruto had her in checkmate. She would only remember her rule about it a few minutes later, as the outcome of this game was a surprise to her. Tsubaki walked in just a few moments later with a large pizza box. She saw Sona looking at her chessboard and also looked at it. She sweat dropped a moment later. Shit, does she remember her rule about losing a match? She asked herself, but approached the desk and sat the box down on it. Aichu, lunch has arrived. Tsubaki said and Sona turned to stare at her for a moment. She saw Sona's eyes widen even more and realized that her king just remembered that rule. Yep, this will get awkward soon. Sona then gazed down at the pizza box, which Naruto was also looking at. Arigato Tsubaki. She then turned back to Naruto. How about a rematch? She asked nervously. Naruto didn't know why she was nervous, but nodded. Why not? He then moved differently in the next match's opening. It was now past 1500 hours and Sona was gazing at her new queen with a sweat drop. He had won all 4 chess matches they had played. He's good, but how is he winning? He doesn't know about my rule for chess, does he? She mentally asked herself. Even Tsubaki was gazing at him with surprise. Sona rubbed the bridge of her nose and decided to ask Naruto how he was winning so easily. He had only lost about a third of his pieces each game. How is it that you are winning so easily? What is your strategy? She asked slowly, still coming to terms that she would now have to marry him. According to the rules she set up after breaking out of her previous engagement. Naruto chuckled after she finished asking and focused on her. It is simple, Sona Citri. You were trying to counteract a strategy you thought I was using, when in fact I had none. How can one counteract a strategy that does not exist? He explained and asked her. Sona's eyes widened, but he continued before she could try to answer. One thing I have learned in my time as an Anbu is that against another strategist, or in open combat, one is best throwing strategy out of the window. No plan survives first contact with the enemy in an open setting, and contingencies must be in place when devising a strategy for taking out one's target. He then paused and looked towards the ceiling. Against a strategist, or in fully open combat, I use a reactionary type of strategical process. I only set a goal and then react using mental and physical reflexes that make most look slower than a snail. It has helped me survive and even win many battles and games of strategy. Sona closed her eyes and sighed. Unpredictable then. I suppose that being so would mean the end of many and be a strategist's worst opponent. She then slumped her shoulders. Just wait until my family hears about this. I may have to tell them myself if she stopped and clenched her hands on the desk. Her head slumped as well. Naruto raised an eyebrow and fished for her to finish. If what? Tsubaki decided to explain for their king. Sona Kaichu was once in a marriage arrangement with another high-class devil. She didn't want to marry the fool and challenged him to a chess match. If she won, then she would be free. If she lost, then she would have to follow her family's wishes and marry the man. She paused for a moment to see if Sona would object to her explaining it to him. When she noticed Sona nod for her to continue, she turned back to him. She easily won that match, from what I have heard. However, her father was nearly labeled as something unsavory by the family that wanted this proposal to happen. Kaichu made a rule in front of the Council of Devil Elders. If a man was able to beat her in chess without fluking, she would marry that man without issue. She then looked back at Sona. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. Well, that's a real clusterfuck. Probably should have told me that before we started, but I suppose it's out of our hands now. Was there a mystical contract involved with this rule? He asked Sona, opening his eyes to gaze at her. Sona opened her eyes and stopped to think about it. She didn't get far in her thoughts, however, as a magic circle glowed on her desk. So Tai-Ian. Came the sound of her sister's shout. The circle seemed to be trying to break from the volume of the shout and Naruto had to cover his new ears. Sona sighed before speaking. Please Ni-sama, do not scream. Now what is it? She then put her head in her left hand while the elbow of the arm rested on the desk. Naruto rubbed his ears and glared at the circle. If this is what I can expect from her family, then I hope we don't actually meet often. He thought, which got a chuckle from Kurama. I called to see if your cute queen was awake yet and Ka-san wanted to tell you that she will be visiting this weekend. Seraphil answered, a lot more quietly. Sona sighed in relief at the fact that Seraphil wasn't screaming anymore. I see. Arigato, One-sama. She then paused and watched as Naruto continued to rub his ears. Hi, he is awake. Though I have a favor to ask of you. Sona then gazed back at the circle and waited for Seraphil to respond. What you need, Sotan? Sona sighed and asked. Did Toussaint ever use a magical contract to write about that engagement rule I made? The one that I made after getting free from that other contract? Naruto stopped rubbing his ears and all three paid attention to Seraphil's next words. I'll have to see anyway, I'll look before coming to see you tomorrow. Seraphil said and the circle disappeared. Sona sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Damn it, I was hoping she wouldn't come back for a while. She said with a groan and turned to look at Tsubaki. Tsubaki grimaced and turned to leave. I'll prepare your Ka-san's preferred brand of tea leaves. Tomorrow is Saturday, after all. She said as she opened the door. Sona nodded before turning back to the chessboard. Arigato, Tsubaki. She then looked at Naruto. I hope this doesn't get in the way of anything between us, for a while at least. She then reached into her bottom left desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of whiskey with 2 glasses. A drink? She asked before putting the 3 glass objects on her desk. He noticed that she only did this due to stress. Only if you'll allow me to smoke as well. He replied. He pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket dimension when she nodded, as well as an ashtray. He didn't bother with a lighter and used a small amount of chakra to light the one he pulled out of the pack. Sona's nose twitched slightly as she poured the 2 small glasses full. Vanilla? She asked as she pushed 1 glass to him. Having smelled the scent of the smoke, she then looked at him. His eyes had closed and he seemed to be content with the scent. Hi, my preferred scent for tobacco. He responded after taking a drag. He then used a bit of mana to open the window to the left of her and blew the smoke from his lungs out to it. Sona hummed and closed her eyes. It's better than most. She said and sipped from her glass. It's actually pretty good. I don't normally like the scent of smoke much. She thought before passing him a glass mat so that the desk wouldn't be marked. Naruto nodded and proceeded to sip from the glass she gave him. Different than I've had before, but not bad. He said, he then opened his eyes. I take it that most our age cannot drink alcohol. Sona nodded and took another sip. Not in the human world. Only when they reach a certain age are the humans allowed to imbibe. I take it that in your world it was different. Naruto took a drag of his cigarette and answered. As shinobi, or part of the daimyo's military, yes. You were considered an adult the moment you put on the headband or officially declared by the Lord. Otherwise, you had to be 18. He then took another sip of his alcohol after he blew the smoke out again. Sona nodded and decided to learn more about her new peerage member. What was your reason for joining your home's military, if I may ask? Naruto hummed and looked at the ceiling again. Originally, it wasn't my choice. My home's leader, the Hokage, did it so that I could protect myself. If the village learned about who my parents were, it could have led to another war. Hiruzen decided to induct me secretly into the Anbu and even went so far as to destroy all evidence of my existence outside of my birth. He took a sip and drank again. The only thing he could not destroy was the Namikaze and Uzumaki family tapestries. He thought that they had seals in place to stop it, but it wasn't a chakra ability. My father used his own arcane knowledge to seal them. He then looked back to her. Over time, it became the only thing I knew. Until I became a captain and learned everything about my family. I also learned a few mana arts and had even started to learn about the primordials until Hiruzen gave me my final mission. He then sighed. I was considered a strange captain for my squads. I still wore my heart on my sleeve and was even considered the brightest member of Anbu. I became the commander around a year before I had to take that mission. He sighed and swirled the whiskey in his glass around a little while staring in it. I was tasked with watching over my own generation as they were becoming ninja. That mission only recently ended with their deaths, the deaths of my friends. He then looked back at her. Would I change it if I had the chance? Only their deaths, not the fact that I was forced to be a part of the Black Ops. I hold pride in my accomplishments, but even I have to say that it wasn't the best choice. Sona nodded and gazed at the clock. It was now 16:30 and she knew that Tsubaki would be preparing dinner soon. She finished her glass and stood. Naruto followed her by drinking the rest of the glass she gave him and then putting his cigarette out in the ashtray he had summoned. He stood and closed the window the same way he opened it earlier. The two left her office and proceeded to the dining hall. She still needed to give him the full tour, but she would wait till after dinner for that. Citri Manor, Underworld. 1700 hours, 19th of June Friday. Seraphol Leviathan appeared in her family's manor, directly in the dining hall. Tucson. She called to her father, who had just sat down with his wife for tea. He appeared to be in his late 20s, though his hair was beginning to gray a little on the sides. His eyes were a deep mix of cerulean and amethyst. Across his left eye was a vertical scar that he received in the Devil's Civil War. The scar came from the last hereditary Leviathan on the throne at the time. His appearance was more like a knight from the medieval era of Europe, whilst his ensemble was a more modern business attire. He turned to his daughter, who now held the throne of Leviathan and had actually followed the true original Satan's ways. Many had forgotten that the original four did not care about fighting the other factions, but their grandchildren started those wars. Yes, princess. He asked her warmly, even his voice sounded like a righteous knight and still made many females swoon. Seraphol approached her parents and seemed to be in thought. The two others waited for her to finish thinking about what she would say and knew not to interrupt her while she was doing so. She only waited a few minutes to get her thoughts in order. I called Sona to let her know that Ka-san would visit her tomorrow and I learned a few things these past 2 days. She said and paused to see if they would ask. They didn't, as was normal. They would learn everything from her by allowing her to explain things at her own pace. Sona has finally acquired a queen and it's quite surprising on what he is and how powerful. She then pulled a picture that she had taken while there, not even letting Sona know that she did. He is a Kikbi and while I was there I sensed his power level. She then turned her head to look out the window. He is weakened, for the moment. As he was thrown through the dimensional gap from another dimension and chosen by Office to be her champion. This made their eyes widen, but they wouldn't say anything until she was done. His power, while in a weakened state, is just slightly beyond Surzich's power level. This made her father gape, as only 2 others currently alive were stronger than Surzich's Lucifer, formerly Gremory. Office herself and the dragon of the apocalypse known as the Great Red. Even her mother, Amelia, gaped at her. She then handed them the picture she had taken. Lord Melodius Citri gazed at the photo and gulped slightly. Amelia also took in the features of Sona's new queen. They could feel the power in the image and even took note that the body of the young man was built for the most rigorous of combat, speed, and stealth. His name is Naruto Uzumaki and no, he is not related to Lady Asaka. His mana element is shadow and his body appears to be designed to fight against things even stronger than Surzich's. She finished and watched her parents take in everything she had said. After a few moments, they turned back to her. She then decided to ask about Sona's rule. When I called Sona earlier, he had awoken. Sona, however, asked me to see if the rule she set up for chess matches was written down with a magical contract. Was it, Tucson? Melodius had to stop for a moment and cast his gaze upwards. He was still reeling at the fact that his youngest daughter's queen was apparently so powerful. And the young man appeared too young for the need of such strength. He had to think about Seraphol's question. I do not believe so. Shall we go check? He asked. Seraphol nodded and even Amelia rose to follow them. The office of Melodius was much like Sona's personal office. It had more windows and a small patio balcony that allowed him and others to step out. There, one could look over the garden that Amelia had started and tended to for centuries. It was his gift to his wife, who was quite the botanist and even alchemist. He sighed once about the fact that Seraphil didn't follow in her mother's footsteps, but at least Sona had somewhat done so. The three approached his desk, made of a rich mahogany wood that was cultivated 2 centuries before. He sat in his chair and began looking through the drawers for the rule that he decided to write down after Sona gave it. It would take a few minutes, as he still had much paperwork littered throughout the desk and drawers. Amelia was glad that she didn't decide to take an active role in the family's upkeep, she only helped when the head servants couldn't make it. She preferred her garden over paperwork. Too bad our daughters are too much into being heads. She thought with a silent sigh. After nearly 10 minutes, Melodius pulled out the paper he was looking for. Well, here it is. He then cleared a space on his desk to study it. He went through the wording, while Seraphil cast a detection on it. I'm not sensing a mystical component on it. Is this the only copy? Seraphil asked in a serious tone. She waited for her father to get through reading the paper. As he finished, he cast his own detection spell on it. It's not the only copy, but I can sense that both were not made with magic. So I can safely say that her worries need not stay on this. He said, which made Seraphil sigh in relief. Why are you so worried about this yourself, Sarah-chan? Amelia asked, making Seraphil turn to her. Her voice was so much like Sona's, but her eyes looked like sparkling emeralds. Her hair was a deep ocean blue. The Leviathan looked at both of them and seemed to be a little nervous. I think that her new queen may have won a match or two. I'll have to check with her when we go tomorrow, Ka-san. She said, which made the two parents raise an eyebrow. Don't you have duties to attend to? Melodius asked. Seraphil shook her head. No, I'm currently on leave until December. So I can spend some time with the family. She then turned to her mother again. I want to test her new queen and make sure he isn't negative about the situation. She said, which made her mother nod. Alright then. We'll go see Sona-chan tomorrow. Amelia said, before standing to leave. Seraphil turned to her father and thanked him before she left as well. Damn it, my little girl might be engaged now to an unknown. Would you find this funny, father? His mental query would not be answered, as most of the Citri family was killed in the Devil's Civil War. Sona's Manor. Rear courtyard. 1900 hours. Sona finished giving Naruto the tour, showing him the back area of her home. It had a few sakura trees and an island in a small pond that housed the largest of those. There was also a garden, and he could smell the medicinal properties of some of the plants. It also held quite a few rose bushes. Sona turned to him and noticed his bipedal gaze at the roses. She was also able to tell that he was hiding some pain at seeing them. He must have a deep memory of roses, probably lost someone who liked them. She waited for him to stop gazing at the flowers and spoke when he turned back to her. As you know, this is my main living area. Since you do not have a place to stay, I would be glad to offer you housing here. She said lowly, even though he and Tsubaki could hear it. Naruto looked to the sky for a moment before he sighed and nodded. I suppose that would be best. I must thank you for your hospitality, and I am willing to see just where this will take us. He then turned to the pond and started walking toward it. I shall meditate for now, I believe that you will want to test me at some point. He said, as he placed a foot on the water. Sona and Tsubaki gasped slightly as he walked across the 20-foot wide moat of water surrounding the small island. What is he, flipping Jesus? Tsubaki thought and winced as she thought the name of the son of Yahweh. Sona's eyebrow twitched when she heard a telepathic laugh. It was actually two beings laughing, one she recognized. What else can he fly without the need of wings? She mentally asked and Kurama responded. Hi, he can. Sona then sighed. Tsubaki, she called to her bishop. Tsubaki turned to her. Hi, Kaichu. Sona then turned to her. Let's keep this quiet until he decides to reveal it to others. We don't need others griping for his service. Tsubaki nodded, not knowing that the shinobi could do more than walk on water. Hi, Kaichu. She responded. She then paused for a moment. Momo would like to meet with you tomorrow, she feels like she is ready to join. Sona hummed and watched as Naruto sat beneath the tree to start meditating. Very well, bring her here tomorrow. Around 9:30 would be a good time. Ka-san won't get here till close to 11, so that should give us plenty of time to speak. She then sat on the bench near the pond and watched as the area seemed to brighten up slightly. Even the tree behind Naruto seemed livelier and she could sense that he was using that senjutsu he used earlier when Rias and her two followers were there. Tsubaki nodded and turned to leave. I will tell her, Kaichu. I shall return shortly. She said, but stopped when Sona spoke again. That's alright, Tsubaki, you don't need to return. We'll be fine. Sona then kept gazing at Naruto, she wanted to figure out exactly what he was doing. She then pushed some mana into her eyes and her eyebrows raised. She didn't notice that Tsubaki had nodded and left, she only noticed what was happening around her new queen. He was absorbing dark energy from all around him and then releasing a lighter energy out. This energy was affecting the plants, water, air, and even the very earth he sat on. It seemed to be purifying the area of some taint that she only now noticed from his action. She also noticed how the animals that frolicked around at times seemed to approach the pond and gaze at him. Even birds, who were usually going to nest at this hour, landed on the tree. Some even braved landing on him. It was a strange phenomenon, and yet it made her feel more relaxed than she had been for a number of months. She closed her eyes and almost smiled at the peaceful feeling in the air of her property. She even smelled that her roses were healthier now and her other plants were doing better as well. She decided to sit there for a while. They would return when he was done, as the evening was approaching nighttime more. The weather was nice enough, even if the air was starting to cool a little. Naruto's mindscape, Kurama's den. Naruto sighed, as his senses told him a few things. He could sense a lot of negativity circling the planet, a lot of which was hatred. Some other things, like greed or even a type of power lust, although those others were far outshined by the malice this world seemed to possess for its inhabitants. "This world, can you feel it, Kurama?" he asked. Abij nodded, as his eyes were closed as well. "Hi. This world is soaked in the blood of those filled with pure rage. I'm sure you can feel the inside being almost too abundant. It will need some yang to help kick things off," he said. Naruto nodded and opened his eyes. "You do know that you no longer need that, guys, right, Kuro-chan?" he said. The fox opened its eyes before sighing. When next it spoke, its voice changed to a female's and didn't sound so loud. "You're right. I suppose it would be easier to not hide my true self." The fox's form then glowed slightly before shifting to be smaller. Naruto turned to watch, as he had only seen the great Bijk in this form once before. What appeared from the bright light at the end of the transformation could only be called a visage of beauty. At least to those who would like such a visage. The young teenage girl appeared, with hair as orangish red as a fire and held in a high-top ponytail. Her skin was a lighter tan than his own, and her face was a near visage of the perfect Mo kind. Her height was as small as Kaneko Taoju, and her form was near that as well. Though she had slightly wider hips and her breasts were at a high B-cup size. Naruto would have looked away at the fact that she was naked, but this would be a serious topic to discuss with her. The teen-looking woman opened her eyes, and they were as red as her fox forms. Her tail stretched, and her rabbit-like fox ears did as well. She also stretched, putting on a show that many would have died just to glimpse. Naruto kept his eyes on her own as she finished stretching. She then pulled her chakra out to clothe herself in a black yukata shirt and black Hakama-styled pants. Naruto smiled slightly before he closed his eyes. The area around them shifted and turned into a white space. It only took a moment before color and objects appeared around them. It was an old Shinto-styled temple and courtyard with mountains and forests surrounding it. A pond, a river, and a few sakura trees appeared in the area they stood. A few benches and even a well-cut grass area appeared to his left. Near the grass a small shrine appeared and a covered sword rack. The now revealed female smiled. He remembered it. "Arigato, Naruto-kun," she thought and walked to her friend. She had never told him though that she would love to have more than friendship with him. Even if that was only a dream. Naruto then opened his eyes and stared directly into her own. He then moved forward and embraced her. "It's good to see you again, Kurama. Your other form was a bit disappointing," he whispered into her ear. She laughed and wrapped her arms around him even tighter than his own hold. Almost like she was afraid to let him go. "Hi, but it was necessary for that mission if anyone would have broken past your mental shields and found me in this form," she said lowly. Naruto sighed and nodded as he pet her head. "Hi, you may be stronger in this form, but there is a bit more of a vulnerability to chakra with it. At least we don't have to worry too much about that now." He spoke and then let her go. She let go of him as well and pouted slightly. "True, but my full Bijk form is uncomfortable." Naruto chuckled before his gaze turned serious once more. "We need to figure out what the Ouroboros wanted us here for and why she sent us directly to Miss Citri." He then turned to the grassy area. "Let us spar, we think easier on the move." She nodded before heading to grab a wakizashi. "You're right. Let's see if I can keep up with you, sensei." She jokingly called to him as he made another blade appear in his hand. He formed a clone to continue the nature chakra exercise he was doing. "Shall we try the usual style or something different?" he asked as he stepped onto the grass and slid into his stance. It was the same stance he had used against Sasuke, but Kurama shook her head. "How about the Dark Slayer style?" she asked. This made Naruto pause for a moment and look up. She then pulled on the bond he had with Sona, pulling the young devil into the mindscape while he was distracted. Sona appeared on the bench facing them with her eyes still closed. This will let her see some of his ability. Kurama thought and spoke. "Please, Naruto-kun." Her eyes took on the most influential expression that would make him cave in. Puppy dog eyes, with a teardrop and pout. When he looked back at Kurama, he stiffened slightly. Damn it. No. Not that look, please. He mentally shouted. He sighed after a minute, not even noticing that Sona had opened her eyes to see what was going on, or even that she was there. Fine, Kurama. We can use Darkslayer, just please remember you didn't finish the styles training yet. He then dismissed his current blade and summoned a new one. An okatana still resting in its scabbard appeared in his left hand. He held it by the scabbard, with the handle facing towards his opponent. The way he held it was also like a classical samurai, the blade's edge facing the sky while inside the scabbard. The scabbard was purple, with a golden darkness symbol on both sides and near the bottom of it. A dark gold circle encased by another much brighter circle of gold. The scabbard also had a darker purple cloth tied around it, just below his hand. The handle was a mix of black cloth and white wood surrounding the tang of the blade. The tsuba and pommel were made of a gold-like metal. Though Kurama and Sona could tell it wasn't gold, just colored to look like it. The actual hilt was shaped to look like a full moon, but had a darker colored circle around it. Sona gasped at the beauty of the blade, even if she was still wondering what was going on. "Shall we dance, Kurama?" Naruto asked, his tails taking a lazy swaying motion. Almost like there was a breeze blowing them back and forth. Kurama smiled and assumed the same stance he now held. Looking as though they were standing and watching something in a casual relaxed pose, only they held sword in the opposite hands of their dominant ones. "Of course, Naruto-kun. Just one moment." She then turned to look at Sona. Naruto glanced at where she was looking and almost sighed. "Welcome back to the Seal Sona Citri. I have brought you here so that you may see some of Naruto-kun's ability. While we figure out a few things, you will see just how hard it is for most things to fight your queen." She then placed her right hand on her chest and bowed her head. "I am Kurama, though you now see my preferred form. I am the Kyuubi that Naruto-kun contains within him." Sona's eyes widened as she now recognized the feeling of power this young girl seemed to give out. Naruto sighed again, but knew that he wouldn't be able to say anything about it. I suppose it would make her test be less of a shock. He thought, though he doubted that Sona wouldn't be shocked if he had to use his chakra spells. "Let us begin now, Naruto-kun," Kurama said as she turned back to him. The two nodded and flicked the tsuba of their blades to loosen the swords from the scabbards. Chapter end. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Peace out.